I grew up in a family of boys, and even though I wasn't the youngest, it's clear now that I was the runt of the litter. And I also grew up in a neighborhood filled with boys approximately my own age, and the same comparison could be made with them. And even though I was often the shortest or the least physically capable, I often used that as motivation to try harder to keep up, and this probably led to a bit of overcompensation. And with that, gullibility was one thing that I hated to be convicted of, which often led to a hypercritical or skeptical attitude. And this attitude meant that I was often skeptical of people or things that I shouldn't be, which can be worse than allowing oneself to be misled. So I very, very much sympathize with people who, once they've been misled or betrayed by an authority, they don't give second chances. That whole saying, fool me once, or however it goes.
Fool me once, shame on you.
That dramatically applies to me. But shrewdness and prudence are virtues that any Christian should be aiming at, which is why it's just no good to settle for simplistic formulas or attitudes with regards to questions of trust. So when this most recent round of scandal erupted in the Catholic Church over the past few years, I, like many of you, felt extremely betrayed, and not just by the revelation, but also by the refusal to take necessary and meaningful steps to remedy the problems that exist. And that's why I have a massive amount of sympathy for the climate of outrage that exists in the church today. If I followed my red-headed instincts all the way, I would be out there with the mob, pitchfork in hand, demanding that heads roll indiscriminately. But Catholics and Christians are called to be better than the mob. We're called to be patient and discerning, and to not fall prey to simplistic explanations that may restore our sense of control or understanding, especially when we haven't earned it. One such idea that I think has gained a lot of momentum, especially among traditional Catholics, of whom I find myself in the good company of a lot of the time, is this idea that the church has been infiltrated by subversive adversaries at every level, and that if we're going to save the church, we have to root out that evil influence. Now, I'm not one to say that those ideas are completely without merit, as there are well-documented cases of attempts and conspiracies to infiltrate the Catholic Church. But the response to that has taken on such a hysterical fever pitch in recent years that many are jumping to unwarranted conclusions. One really egregious example that I've seen a lot on social media is this phenomenon where if self-appointed inquisitors can detect anything that a Catholic leader or thinker says that is out of alignment with their own understanding, then they immediately jump to this conclusion that they are one of the infiltrators. I think we've become, in some circles, irrationally paranoid that there is a wolf in shepherd's clothing hiding around every sacristy door, and that the way that we detect them and root them out is by comparing everything that they say and treating it like a Venn diagram with our own understanding of Catholic teaching. And that when we take what they believe and they teach and what we believe and understand, and we line them up, unless it's a perfect single circle, we know that they must be a Freemason or a communist or something like that. And this approach is destined to do more harm than good because, first of all, Catholic teaching isn't always so well defined that we can put such high contrast borders around it. Secondly, there are explanations that are at least as feasible, if not more feasible. For example, just because some leader or high-profile personality in the church disagrees with you on some fine point of understanding, it doesn't mean that they're a saboteur trying to destroy the church from within, any more than it means that you're a saboteur trying to destroy the church because you disagree with them on something. It could just be that you disagree on something that is hard to have unanimity on. Part of the reason this is so pervasive, and this is something I've talked about in the past, is that outrage is very lucrative on social media. And so certain publishers who have dabbled in this approach in the past have been highly rewarded for it, and so have since made it their bread and butter since the scandals emerged. And I know some people will jump to their defense and say, look at all the corruption and the bad people that they've uncovered. But my response to that would be, that's true, but how many innocent people do you think they've slandered in the process? Like, if I take an automatic gun and I spray it into a crowd, I may hit the odd child abuser, But how many innocent people will I take down with them? Caving into this appetite for outrage at every possible opportunity is not shrewd and it's not prudential. I would say that it's lazy, reckless, and unnecessarily divisive. And this becomes especially concerning when it comes to the church, because as much as many of us may not like it, as St. Ignatius of Antioch said, wherever the bishop is, there is the church. So by default, as our first instinct, we owe the bishop deference. If instead we're laboring to scrutinize his every move under the assumption that he might be part of the Velvet Mafia or something like that, then I'm sorry, we've taken a wrong turn. And the great risk in all of this is that we may unnecessarily be sowing division within our Lord's own flock. And I suspect that our Lord will not treat that sin as a mere trifle. Recklessly throwing stones at his bride is not something I would want to be accused of. Now, practically, this matters a lot, because if your concern is combating the enemies of the church, then you should notice that they are all lined up together for no other reason than to oppose Christ's message and the advancement of his kingdom. The reason the acronym used to describe those who endorse alternative sexual ideologies is growing by the day isn't because they all endorse the same intellectual propositions. It's because together they can better oppose traditional ideas about human relationships. There is a battle raging for the hearts and minds of every culture around the world, and the church should be poised to shape the outcome of that. But if we are needlessly and recklessly taking aim at each other, then we will only continue to concede ground in that fight. So at the risk of overplaying my hand, can I make some specific recommendations? The first is that if you consider yourself an Orthodox or traditional Catholic, then Bishop Barron is not your enemy. Like many traditional Catholics, I can think of the odd thing that he said in the past that I might want to reword. But it's also unreasonable for me to expect that for someone who publishes as prolifically as he does, that everything he says and writes is going to be something that I'm going to agree with 100% of the time. So just because I can think of a few instances of which I disagree, doesn't mean that he's my enemy. If the LGBTQIP2SAA community can overcome their differences to work together to advance their objectives, then surely those of us who confess the creed and who are doing our utmost to stand firm in the faith can find more reasons to work together than to tear each other down. And if I can press this point just a little bit further before I lose too many followers, it seems to me that where most people get hung up with Bishop Barron is on his endorsement of the idea that we can have a reasonable hope that all will be saved. I think most people just simply misunderstand what he's saying. I don't believe that he's saying that he believes that hell is empty or that all will be saved. It might help if we put it another way. Think of any person who is not a canonized saint who has died, and then consider the question, is that person in heaven? I think that Bishop Barron would say that it's not unreasonable to reply by saying, I don't know, but I sure hope so. That, to me, is not unreasonable. Lastly, we need to stop relying on social media to get our news and editorials and whatever information it is that is informing our beliefs. And believe me, the irony of that is not lost on me because you're probably watching this on social media right now. So maybe I can amend that to say, do your best to limit your social media usage. The reason is social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter are designed to disarm you of your critical faculties. Now, why? Well, because they want to lower your guard against advertising messaging. Television first tapped into this. We sit down to watch TV or Netflix or streaming or whatever it is that is current today in order to escape our lives, to escape our own thoughts. And there's a reason why phrases like veg out or couch potato are so fitting. We suspend our rational mind for a period of time in order to maximize our amusement. Well, isn't that just the perfect time to try to persuade somebody to buy something that they don't need? Social media works the same way, but with an added psychological manipulation. And this is being revealed by all kinds of research that is pointing out that all those little rewards that are built into social media, like when someone likes or interacts with your content, creates a dopamine effect that is not unlike recreational drugs. In other words, the more you expose yourself to social media, the more intoxicated you are. And maybe I'm wrong, but that doesn't seem like the right time to try to confront geopolitical or ecclesiastical problems and difficulties that require nuanced, detailed critical thinking. So no wonder we're so easily stirred up into accusatory outrage, and this is true for everybody across every spectrum. But for those of us in the church, it will not do. And so it's really important that we immunize ourselves against this, and that it will give us a critical advantage in the battles ahead if we do so. So I really strongly want to advise you to shrewdly limit your exposure to this kind of stuff. But before you do so, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. Thank you so much for watching that. I really hope that you enjoyed it and that you got something out of it. And if you did, and you want to consume more content like this, then please consider subscribing to my channel. Or if you saw this on Facebook, then like my page and follow along. If you're on YouTube, it's not enough anymore to subscribe because YouTube wants to think that it can tell you what you should watch instead of what you actually want to watch. So in this case, you actually have to hit that little bell to be notified as to whether or not I've uploaded something more recently. So please subscribe and hit the bell at the same time. That really helps me out a lot. And if you could consider sharing this among your social network, that helps me a lot too. And if you want to support the making of these videos, please consider supporting my business, which is a communications and strategic marketing company who specializes especially in branding and web design. And this is especially catered towards ministries and apostolates and parishes. We have a parish web design system that we've built specifically for parishes and churches that is affordable, but also beautifully packaged and easy to use. So if you're interested in that, check out my business, which is holdsworthdesign.com, and hit the contact button in the navigation and get in touch, and we can figure out if there's a good fit for you there.